What's the most overrated thing in hospitality technology right now?
The most overrated thing in hospitality technology, I think it's just the saturation of it. There's so many apps copying each other, busting them out. There's just so much out there. I think it's just a saturation issue right now with technology in restaurants.
Okay. But on the flip side, what is the one system that you couldn't operate without?
POS, I think eventually is going to win the war of everything. I think if you can get a POS system that can do payroll really well, having that power, you can build everything around it, I think. And I think ultimately they're going to win because that's kind of the heartbeat of everything that you use is that POS system.
Hello, welcome to Deep Current by Oceans. This is the show for people who actually run operations, the leaders that make everything possible behind the scenes. I'm your host, Kaylor, and today I'm joined by Carlos Casados. He's the COO at MC Hospitality New York. Welcome to the show, Carlos.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
Carlos, can you please tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up in hospitality?
Sure. I got a dishwashing position from a family member of mine at a pizzeria in a small town of 5,000 people in Taos, New Mexico. From there, I got hooked. This was my first role there. I got back of the house, front of the house. I just became obsessed with hospitality, early on. And it's just been a big part of what I do.
Tell us, Carlos, a little bit about your operation. What does it look like? The scale, the team?
Yeah. So I've been involved in a few major operations in the greater New York City area, at the executive level, from airport concessions, all different types of verticals of retail, hospitality, restaurants, casual, QSR. Most recently, I am here with MC Hospitality, helping to scale what I think is a very great movement in hospitality right now, which is a big focus on the guest experience and executing hospitality at a high level. So currently we operate in Monaco, Dubai, New York. We're looking at many other places in the world to scale and grow and bring this particular high level focus of hospitality to all parts of the world. What my day looks like is generally sending reporting out to my leaders, getting things organized, ideas. And right now, what I think the biggest battle for all operators right now is the CRM world and that ecosystem, which I hope we get a chance to kind of talk about a little bit more.
Definitely tell me more about that. What is going on with the CRM world in hospitality?
Yeah, so there's a big war going on right now with the reservation operating systems, the seven rooms, the open tables of the world, Rezzies, the Hawk, all these different tech reservation platforms are either coming together, making partnerships, trying to hold on to their infrastructure or their platforms in the sense of right now, the biggest piece of what makes a successful restaurant, especially in a hyper competitive market, particularly like New York City, is how well do you know your guest, right? And do you have that data? Are you collecting that properly? And then how are you using it? Where we see retail going, where I see hospitality really going is there's a position that was often, I think, overlooked as restaurants either scaled or even has, restaurateurs or operators that weren't so familiar with the business kind of got involved or investing, um, is the maitre d' position. This was a role that was kind of the heart and soul of the restaurant, where you had someone that knew the Johnson family that came in, that knew Bill and Ted. They knew everyone that was coming into the restaurant. They kind of connected what the brand meant to everyone, what the experience you wanted to deliver. They were kind of the glue of holding all that together. And that's really where, in my opinion, everything is really heading right now. How do you really deliver that experience? How do you know more about your guests in the zip code than your competitors? And how can you strategically kind of place yourself to be able to continuously have infrastructure that supports being able to do that long term?
Mhm. I think there's an opportunity here to dive into a little bit of controversy. I had a guest. His name is Joe. He runs a 6 restaurant chain in. I remember it's. I'll tell you later where it was. I
Yeah.
think it was Charlotte actually. So
Okay.
he said he believes the CRM is heading toward not such a great place in hospitality. So he's been driving away from the CRM and into a POS plus a solid stack of supporting tools on top to leverage the data that you're describing. What are your thoughts on that? Do you believe the CRM is the way to go for hospitality? Do you think there is an alternative way to build things?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction there that's important. So, in the old days, before we had all this wonderful different technology to be able to put your brand out there or kind of level the playing field, you would kind of do this all in house and it would all happen kind of organically. As you have all these new systems being introduced, it does create a lot of chaos. And honestly, there are a lot of platforms that operators might use that they're getting all this great data in that they're not really using it, or it's just confusing them, or maybe they didn't pick what was right for them in their current zip code in their neighborhood, and what might work well. So while CRM is important, and I do still think there's a huge importance of it within your business, I think it's more of how you use it and how you react with it, right? You can have all this great data, or you can, have a lot of folks that are engaged with your brand, but if you don't know how to use that and connect that with your experience, and to have your boots on the ground, meaning your service staff, your maitre d', your managers, your events teams, all these different pieces that are involved in making a successful restaurant. If you're not using that properly, then yeah, you're at a disadvantage. However, if you understand how to interpret the data that you're getting and how to use it to really drive experience, and for us particularly at MC Hospitality, it's a brand, it's a lifestyle. There's a connection from the moment that you might click on a button to book with us, from the moment you arrive to when you leave, after your birthday, whatever may happen during your interaction with us, there's a high touch level of brand involved in that, and a connection of like, hey, you're with us. Hey, we're doing this together almost. There's a contribution there. I think when you pair that with the CRM data, that's a powerful thing. But the former guest that you had on, I could see an argument that says, hey, if you're not using this right, or you have the wrong systems overall, it can cause confusion within the operation for sure. There's no question about it.
Mhm. That's really a topic that I think should be unpacked a little further because I definitely see this going into different directions when I interview guests about it, and it's turning into quite an interesting thing to discuss. So let's put a pin on that because I want to make sure that I come back to how you are running your stack. To talk a little bit about you just for a little longer, tell me what part of MC Hospitality and how the operation is running you're most satisfied with right now. That something that your team has built, something that they figured out, maybe you have pushed out that's actually working the way that it should be.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and there's a lot of different angles here that you can take. And as an operator, I think right now, and this might be a little particular for New York, but I think it applies to really any place where you have a hyper competitive market, right? Where there's lots of different options to dine at, to spend money at, where there's such a high saturation. And right now, what we're most proud of, and what I think I've put forward that's really helped us to differentiate is our training, and how every interaction goes, and it echoes a little bit of what I was saying before. But let's say, for example, you come in, you're visiting from out of town, you're staying at a local hotel, you decide it's your birthday weekend, you decide to book with us, you have a reservation with us, everything goes great. You come and have a great dinner, there's live music going on, you do a wine tasting with us, you have a great dinner, everything goes really great. Well, our follow up after that, would be to send to your hotel a nice little care package afterward and just thank you for coming in and saying, hey, we really loved hosting you. Anytime you're in here, please, anytime you're around New York City, friends, family, please let them know about us. I think how you really treat each level of whether you're rewarding a guest when they're first booking with you, every piece of interaction and how they're interacting with your brand is so vital and important right now. And that's really where our focus is. And, for us, we're seeing a lot of success with it. How you're making someone actually feel is really connecting them with our brand and helping to drive much more than just sales. And there's longevity within that. So we're seeing a lot of success with how we follow up with someone. It's not a standardized email, it's personalized. We're talking to them. I think an important thing that we've done is we've found a voice. We have a brand and we found a voice with what we sound like, what we want, And we're able to really communicate that effectively out into the world to our neighbors, to those that are visiting, maybe catching a show at Lincoln Center, particularly here in New York City. We're able to really connect at a higher level, and it's made a difference. And a lot of that has had to do with just training and saying, hey, here's what we think of up top about the brand. How does that translate to the host? How does that translate to the server, the bartender, and their day to day interactions? That's a big differentiator, I think, right now for those that are succeeding, especially when the market's taking dips and whatnot, versus those that are just at the whim of the market and aren't really taking any preventative actions to be able to kind of get ahead of when there might be dips in the market or certain things out of their control.
Hmm. So much to unpack out of what you just said. First of all, you're painting an excellent picture. You're making me want to just visit and experience everything that you've just described. Beyond that, I have a couple of questions. One of them has to do with volume. How many people roughly do you think are going through, let's say, on a monthly basis, through your venues, and how do you keep the experience personalized for everybody?
Yeah. That's a great question. Our property, the one specifically in New York City, which I'll reference a little bit because it's very interesting and it has a lot of things going on with it. And it's kind of great because you can apply some of the things I'm saying into your operations, or someone that might be listening might be able to kind of take an idea and be like, oh, that's great. So our property in New York City, we actually have a building that we own that occupies both sides of the street on different streets, and they're actually connected internally. So between both of those venues, we see probably about 2 to 3,000 guests per month that are coming through those venues, right? In order to keep it very personalized, very interactive, and to keep a high level touch on everyone, we use systems like Seven Rooms. We have lots of training that we do, but it's all about how you structure your day, right? The management teams are highly involved. We Google every guest before they come into our restaurant so we know who's in the room. So beyond just having someone book with you, we're trying to curate what that room's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, and how we're going to react to those folks that are in the room. So we'll go through with the host team, with the servers, with the bartenders, with the operations team that's about to go into service, and we'll discuss every single reservation, every single guest, and how we're going to approach that to be able to make something that's truly impactful, not just, hey, I went to a nice restaurant, it looked great, the food was great. Hey, all that stuff's great, right? You need to have great food, you need to have clean, organized spaces, you need to have trained staff. But there's a little bit of magic and X factor in restaurants that you can't really formulate. It's about personalities. It's about some training. It's about doing what we do, which is preparation, and really kind of getting an understanding. What's this room going to feel like? And what are we going to do to make an impact within that? It's a difficult thing, but when you commit to that on a day to day basis, it can sometimes feel like, hey, is this doing anything? Is it moving the needle? But after some time, you start to see some real changes, and you start to see it in your feedback from your guests. You start to see it in the relationships that are built on the ground level. And to me, that really gets at kind of what you were asking.
Hmm. On the flip side of that, what, in your opinion, is the hardest part of your job that somebody from outside the industry wouldn't appreciate or understand because they just don't think of it?
Yeah, that's probably the best question of all of these. There's a lot of chaos right now, I think, or I guess I'll use another word. There's a lot of noise within all this different tech and operations and hospitality and what's going on. There's a lot of folks that are tell you they're experts that'll tell you this is what you have to do, here's what you have to do. There's a lot of different tech companies trying to fight to get their systems within your operation. So I think really trying to find the signal through the noise is the hardest part. What truly works for what we're doing and what our vision is, right? Sounds very simple, sounds maybe oversimplified, like, that's a cop out answer, but it really is. If you're spending times within your four walls, you really understand the operation and you're operating really based on signal and getting all that static out of there. That's probably the most challenging part of what we do, is trying to really zone in on what's truly important to push things forward and what we're trying to accomplish and get everyone lined up behind that and kind of get all the noise out of there. And being able to do that at my level for managers and leaders and allow them to really focus in on what we're trying to accomplish and then having them do that for the service team. That's the most challenging part to do consistently and kind of creates what I mentioned earlier, which is that X factor in restaurants where you can't really pin it down. The music's great, the food's great, the restaurant's great, it feels alive. That's an X factor, right? And for me, signaling in on that signal, knock out the noise. What are we trying to accomplish here? That's the toughest part to do day in and day out. But when you can, and some days you fail at it, maybe some days you don't, but when you can really tune into that, I think that's where there's that X factor and that success that, you feel when you go into a really great restaurant.
Mhm. That is an absolute excellent segue into the next section that I wanted to take us into. And this is exactly what we are just discussing about your stack and about all of these tools that are used regularly in hospitality. So there's one thing that I hear consistently, and that has to do with the problem with integration between different tools. It also plays into what you just described. Where am I getting this data to that I can make decisions on? So tell me if you've had challenges and struggles with integration between tools, or do you feel you've gotten past that already?
No, it's a great question. So I'll use the reservation platforms one more time because there truly is kind of a battle and war going on there, right? There was this recent article with Open Table where they updated their terms of agreement, right? That everyone was kind of interested in because, there's probably the appetite for them to shy away from integration, to say, no, hey, we have our infrastructure. We want to hold on to this. This is ours. We don't want too much interaction. And then you have other platforms, maybe like a Seven Rooms or a Resi, who are more open to saying, hey, we want to integrate. You want to be able to play nice. You see that doing this makes our brand stronger, right? And I think that is where the industry is kind of heading to. But if you're an operator, for example, in New York City, how am I going to get folks to book? Right? You have all these different options. What am I going to choose? Right? Can be pretty confusing, and there is a wrong or right choice there to some extent, right? So we actually use four booking systems that kind of syndicate into one, right? We have to use all of these because, hey, we want to attract the person on Resi. Hey, we want to attract the consumer on Open Table. We want to attract the consumer on Talk. We want to attract the consumer on Seven Rooms. Ultimately, I think you have to have some sort of experience or background in operations to get down to listen. Most folks are clicking on our booking widget from here. It doesn't really necessarily matter all these other platforms because ultimately they're going to our website and clicking there to make a booking. So whatever we have there is probably the majority of what is happening, right? Of where most folks are booking through. However, it creates, like I said earlier, it creates a chaos within what am I going to choose? What am I going to do? You got to really signal in on what you're trying to accomplish and what you want to do. But that segment of operating right now is quite difficult because there are a lot of folks that don't want to integrate, that want to shy away from that. And it makes it extremely hard when you're like, hey, these are just my guests that I want to get into a seat. But it complicates things when you have all these layers and all these different platforms kind of jockeying for, all of the clients. And then when you take that from one place in New York City, you kind of spread it across the country. If I have restaurants at multiple locations and Open Tables kind of trying to get me to just use that as a blanket where it might put me at a disadvantage in one market as another, that ultimately probably is not going to work for me. And I'm probably not going to want to work with that technology. I want to go with someone that has flexibility, that's speaking my language, and that's kind of looking more long term. Um, and right now that creates, again, if I'm a young COO or I'm a director of operations and I'm trying to kind of sift through the noise, it's difficult when all these companies are promising you things where you're signing agreements, where you need time to let that data catch up to see if it's having an effect. It's quite difficult right now.
Wow, there's so much there, but let me ask you this question, and I hope it's not too much of a curveball, but what do you think is the cost of that? Is it more of time cost for you personally as a leader? Is it a time cost for your team? Is it a cost in maybe potentially lost sales because of inefficiency? Where do you think the cost is?
Yeah, I think it actually affects all of those. And first, it's going to affect your sales, right? Picking the wrong booking platform or not having a great relationship with who is doing that for you is it can cost you major dollars, and you may not even notice it. For a couple months, maybe a quarter, if you're not paying attention. It kind of depends also on the lifespan of the restaurant. Listen, in your first 1 to 5 years of launching a restaurant or having a restaurant, there is a lot of interesting data there because I'll give you an example. In New York City, I can open a restaurant. The first 3 years, very interesting because there's so many potential consumers in that market, especially if you're at a location where folks may frequent or you have some sort of attraction near there. Things can look like they're going really well and sales are going really well. And you could be using wrong systems and still kind of getting a decent result. And then you find out 2, 3 years into it, whoa, this actually was not great for us. And now that I'm digging in, we actually paid more to get these folks into our restaurant than we should have. And we could have captured a higher yield as opposed to, let's say, you're a restaurant that's been around for 4 or 5 years. Things have kind of leveled out a little bit and it's a little clearer on what decisions you have to make. But the cost, the stakes, I should say, are a little higher when you're, let's say, you're in a 4 or 5 year restaurant that's been open and sales are starting to plateau or maybe not heading in the right direction. What you're picking to interact with in your tech stack or platforms you're partnering with, that can make it or break it. And sometimes it takes a little while to get data when you're making those types of decisions. So you have to be obsessed with what's happening within your four walls, and you have to align that with the technology and the partnerships that you're going to build. And you have to leverage those. If you're not leveraging every one of those partnerships, or it doesn't feel like it's a conversation with the folks that you've teamed up with for their tech, you're going to ultimately lose, or things are going to happen that are probably going to negatively affect the business. It has to feel like a conversation. It has to feel like they're also involved in looking out for what you're doing as well. It's super important right now, I think, with all the different tech that's out there.
Do you think we could assign a numbers to that? If you had to give me like a ballpark range of, inefficiencies, for example, what is the percentage of sales, maybe average across the industry that you believe might be lost due to this inefficiency, or maybe even wasted time from the workforce? Would you be able to calculate more or less what you believe a ballpark would be?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think it would depend on the operation. Let's say, for example, I have a small 90 seater in New York City that's doing maybe $4 million a year, something like that. They're hoping to do more, hoping to grow out of that. Let's say quarter one, January, February, March. Those are cold months generally in New York City. It can fluctuate. Sure, there's small fluctuations there. However, that's a tough quarter to deal with, right? So if you don't have the right systems in place and the market's taking a small dip as it naturally does, that's going to hurt you even more because you're not positioned to kind of counteract that dip in the market, right? You haven't done much to position yourself. So you could, let's say you're on pace during those months to do somewhere in the $400,000 range, to meet your $4 or $5 million goal that you may have throughout that fiscal year, for example. During those months, you could see somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $90,000 in lost revenue for not having the right tech stack, for not positioning yourself properly. Those are real numbers. Those are things that can drive a business after 2 or 3 years. It could be $250,000 of a loss in that quarter if you're not paying attention, if you don't have the right partnerships and you don't have the right leadership in place that's making those decisions and hey, signal, no noise, right? I'll go back to that. Like, get all that static out of there. You got to be focused on the signal. So we're talking real money there. And that's just from a sales standpoint. Now, in our particular industry of hospitality, now that means, hey, let's say tipped employees now are a little unhappy, right? They're not making as much money. They start to lose buy in. The managers, you might not be able to get that raise to someone that deserved it. All these little things start to happen. People stop, the buy in starts to kind of lessen. And now you're not driving brand or experience. So even from just the money you're losing, now you could be driving your culture and the buy-in that you have within that business that could be otherwise successful to even have worse effects as you go throughout the year. Turnover, the cost of that, all that kind of stuff can happen. So it really is a balance.
Mhm. So in that case, well, let me zoom in into specifically MC hospitality and how you are running things and how your team is running things. Specifically in this same subject that we're in, walk me through the typical morning, specifically from the perspective of understanding what the operation looks like and where things are at. And what's giving you a real time picture versus what you have to wait on a report for
Yeah.
example?
Yeah. That's such a great question. So, the one thing I'll say overarching for this, because none of it really matters if this particular piece isn't in place, is that you have to be involved, right? You have to some extent, if you're running multi unit, if you're kind of bouncing around, you have a big portfolio, you still have to visit those places. You still have to see what it looks like early in the morning before someone arrives, late at night when everyone's gone, in the middle when it's busy, on a slow day. You have to have some sort of interaction with that, even if you're not the operator itself. There has to be some level of interaction that maybe you're also having to some extent, particularly if you're running in some markets that are hyper competitive, like New York City, London, Chicago, LA, Dubai. Monaco's a little different. We're a little insulated there. It's pretty interesting. But I would say that that's still a big piece of you have to know the business and you have to know what's happening within your businesses to some extent. So a lot of what we do is to be able to take data. There's a few different pieces that I break it down to. There's the fiscal part where you got to see, hey, what have we done in the last 6 weeks on this particular days, on these different weeks over weeks, day over day versus last year, where our projections going? How is all of that working? Do we see that we're on track for what we're forecasting? Do we see that that's working in the right direction? Or do we need to dive deeper into what's happening there? So that's like the financial fiscal thing. You're going to see, I'll give one quick example on this before I move on to the other pieces. You see a lot of folks panic if they have maybe 2, 3 days where the sales don't pan out and they're not looking long term and they start making these decisions, or there's pressure from leadership or from ownership. What's going on? What up? And they can't really interpret it and they get kind of forced to start making decisions that they normally wouldn't because they're a little panicked. So, you got to understand that if you're positioning yourself to do the right things fiscally, you have all the things in place of what your plan was and what you're forecasting. You got to let things play out a little bit so long as you're being responsible and you're looking at that properly, right? So there's that fiscal piece. You got to see where your trends are going, what's happening, and if you have to make any changes there. And there's a ton within that, from menu pricing, from PMIXs, from check averages. There's so much that goes into that piece, but you got to look at the trends. And then if you need to go in and dissect, there's that piece of it. There's the culture piece of it. We do these surveys from our staff that allow us to get a good sense of where our staff's at. Are we healthy there? Folks like coming in here. Folks like being here. Are there work irritants? We have a huge open door policy where we love collaboration. Let us know what you see, what you'd like to see. We love that because it really allows us to know if the folks that are working for us that have to deliver all of these goals and have to do all of these tasks and all of these things, if they're happy, if what they're doing is working, if what we're doing for them is working, right? That there's a good culture piece. So we've looked at the financials, we've looked at the culture over the last 6 weeks and where we're trending, how it's all working, and how those things are divided together. And if both of those things are healthy and are looking good, great. If not, you dig in. And you have to, not wait, as you mentioned earlier, necessarily on a report. Like, what does it feel like for our guests, or what does it feel like for those that are coming in to work for us? That's a very important piece of what's happening. Then there's the facilities itself, right? There's a major compliance, there's a major importance to how the venue feels from the outside, what it looks like for your neighborhood, how it interacts with your neighborhood, and then the overall organization, cleanliness and compliance of what your piece is. So for me, when I walk in, it's all of these things at once. And listen, it is an overwhelming thing if you don't have this organized, because that's all happening in real time. There's issues, leaks, boilers going out. There's all this happening. There's a HR issue that you're having to solve here with your HR team for something that happened. The number what didn't hit forecast. All of these things are happening, all at once. So not just being organized, but knowing how to move and what decisions that you need to make based on that data is a huge importance, and kind of why I, in a way, called out what you had talked out about earlier with the CRM. Hey, we got to get away from CRM and really focus just in house on what we're doing and blah, blah, blah. Well, that could be true if you're not utilizing that properly or not seeing what is happening from that data. But if you can see the data and really use it and apply it from experience, That's the differentiator right there for me.
Mhm. So there's so much that you've just said that could be displayed in many different ways. I mean, it could be a dashboard, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a notebook, right? That somebody has on their desk, like one of the managers. So for you to be able to handle all of that information, specifically to MC hospitality in your role, how does that work today? Is it a lot of spreadsheets that you have to shift through every day? Do you have a comprehensive view? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually put together a lot of this stuff for our company. I've been very frustrated, in the past by having five different spreadsheets for finance and then HR and then your guest feedback scores, and it's just chaotic. And really, I'm actually something that I'm working on in the background with some folks and investors is a kind of one size fits all um, system that could solve exactly what you just said. There's a few of them out there that are trying to do this. I don't know that anyone's done this particularly effectively. And it really takes a true insider. And I'm not saying that's necessarily just going to be me, but it does take an insider that's been there with a spreadsheet or a pen and paper, taking inventory at 2:30 in the morning and weighing out every single thing that you have within that building over the course of a couple of years to really understand what works and what doesn't work in hospitality. There's a lot of folks that think, hey, I have this idea to do this and this is going to solve X or whatever. Doesn't always work in hospitality. And that's what makes things so interesting in this particular sector of the business, right? Is how can you have something that allows you to see the whole ecosystem of the restaurant so that you can make a better informed decision? So we try to limit at each level kind of what the operator, the hourly employee, the ownership, the CFO, what does everyone actually need to see to make an informed decision? And do we need to throw a bunch of data at this? Or do we need to not throw as much data on it? How to kind of organize this. I'll give you a quick example. A P&L. Yes, you need every single piece of everything that goes into a P&L, the general ledger, what the invoice was. You need all these different pieces and everything that's attached to that. You need all of that data somewhere, right? And a CFO or a accountant, whoever you have handling that needs to be somewhere. But does ownership really need to see that level of what that is? And to me, we simplify what ownership sees first, and then we dig in as needed. Same with my operators, my GMs, my director of operations. What do they need to see that's going to be impactful and helpful to them? Do we want to just when you throw so much at someone and there's so many things going on, things get missed. We're human here, which is interesting talking about AI, but we're human here. So to me, it's about being careful about who sees what and how much you give to everyone. So what I like to do is daily I do reporting, weekly I do reporting, monthly and quarterly, right? We have all of that and it does live somewhere. To me, it's the amount of what you're giving to each department to see to actually help them or guide them to reach what you're forecasting or what your goals or what your plan might be for your business. So all of the systems, I'll give you like Seven Rooms, for example, has great reports that automatically generate and pull for me that I then compile with other things so that I can give my leaders, my ownership, our CFOs, everyone that works within their business the right amount of information they need to help run their departments. And if we need to dig into something, hey, all of that lives somewhere. But I think it's really about controlling what everyone is looking at, what they're focused on. Because again, there's so many pieces to someone coming in, walking into a bar, buying a beer and some oysters. It's so simple, but everything around that is so complex. So how do you get everyone to focus on the right things? And to your point, and kind of I think what you're getting at with your question is what are you looking at that's helping you to make a sound decision? Could we have 10 Excel spreadsheets sent to someone and five reports? Sure. Is that moving things forward? I think that's where the key is, and that's where the question really lies.
Hmm. You definitely hit the nail on the head there, Carlos, and that's a huge pain point and a very recurring subject on this podcast, where everybody has kind of a different idea of the perfect state of this and the way that they would see this working in a way that's tailored to them. So I think you mentioned a couple of things that are a little bit paradoxical, which are, yes, maybe there's an opportunity to build a system that's very comprehensive and that's kind of a one size fits all solution for the hospitality space. At the same time, everybody has unique needs. Like every single company that I talk to, they have such unique needs that they are struggling between, do we go out and find this perfect solution, or do we build this for ourselves? But that's, definitely a topic that would need to be unpacked a little further. And on that same subject, you described the signal versus noise, and I hear you saying this over and over: signal versus noise, which I believe there's a lot of value in. When we talk about signals, for example, when something happens unexpectedly mid operation, like a system that goes down, somebody calls in sick, a fire in a kitchen, whatever, right? How quickly does it show up in a way that you can act upon?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just before I answer that piece of it, just really quickly, what's interesting is we would normally run in the olden days. So I'm 40 years old. And in the olden days, everything that you did was kind of boots to ground. And I think that's the app that's missing is how do you get something that can generally give you what you need for a restaurant, but can be customized, but can generally do what a restaurant did before you had all this tech introduced. Because I do think tech is important. I think it does help us to see data quicker. And I think, for instance, like Toast, I think, so many folks use that and just, oh, that's just Toast. Hey, it kind of revolutionized a lot of how you run your business and made it easier to make some decision making and pull reports and do things pretty quickly. So, how do you get back to that uniqueness of each individual property while having a generalized way of keeping it organized? I think that to me is like that's the app that needs to be invented. Like how do we get that package that can be customized, but that can really allow you to be unique in the zip code you're at? Because this is really where everything is going. If you don't stand out, if you don't have brand, if you're not attaching yourself to something, you don't have a true story to tell. Especially in a market like New York, is that you're not going to be around for a long time because no one's really resonating or connecting with it. But to answer your question, hey, listen, there's something unexpectedly happens within your operation, right? How do folks react to this? And then how does that show up in the reporting and how you make future decisions? Is that kind of what you're going towards?
No, well, yes and no. I mean, we discussed the reporting, like the higher level views that you're making decisions on. This is more about the day to day, like the fires that you have to put out and how quickly you can actually resolve them so that you minimize collateral damage. So it's more the day to day.
Yeah, this to me is all goes back into training, your hiring processes, your training. You know, you can always expect the unexpected, but it's really the leaders and the folks that you've put into place and how well that you've trained them to react to these different things. A system going down, you can't run credit cards. We're fortunate to have tech that helps us to identify everyone that's in the room. Even if you're walking, no matter where you're at, we have communications and contact with you. How does the manager solve that, right? Have you given them the tools to solve that? Have you empowered them to solve that? I think a lot of general management job or floor management positions, event director roles or event, marketing coordinator roles, they haven't really been properly empowered or trained or given the vision of what needs to happen and how to react to it. And then everyone's relying on one person. If the whole business relies solely on me, we've failed, you know, is my take on that. It's how well you've positioned, trained, and allowed the talent that you have to react to these things. Because, for example, and to answer your question, if you haven't, hey, there could be a work irritant or a problem that can cost serious dollars over the course of a week or a month on it that will show up in your P&L. And then even within your culture, where again, that buy-in that's so important, if you lose that, if folks don't know what to do when these things happen, if you haven't trained or prepared, yeah, those are big dollars and possibly turnover that are going to leave your business. And everyone knows now the cost of hiring talent and developing talent right now. This is a huge focus in our industry. There's such tough jobs. I think some of the most talented people are in hospitality because they can do many things at once. And I truly believe that. I think we have some of the smartest, most talented people in this industry, and I've seen it firsthand. So you don't want to not have training in place, not be able to give and empower your team to be able to make decisions. Because if not, these little things that you're talking about day to day, they're going to turn into mountains. You're going to lose staff. You're going to lose dollars, and you're going to have an operation that's dysfunctional pretty quickly if you don't have systems in place to be able to nourish folks to be able to make decisions and react to these things.
Mhm. Great answer, Carlos. So let me pivot away from that for a moment to talk a little bit about you've brought out open tables, so that actually reminded me of the guest experience and what happens before they even come to the location where they will actually go through that experience. For example, the pre-arrival window is something I find fascinating. This applies more to hotels than restaurants, maybe, but I still believe it's applicable to everything. I 15 to 20% of ancillary revenue is left on the table by many businesses because they're not leveraging what happens before guests arrive or the regulars. So are you currently able to leverage in a tangible way the time frame between the moment that a guest books and the moment that they are sitting there at at the table or at the place that they've actually intended to arrive?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and there's so many new apps that have come out that are trying to help um, bridge that gap. Actually, I had a meeting recently with a company that has an app where you can text and have drinks before you even arrive set at your table or an appetizer or something like that, so that in between time trying to fill that with great communication. I don't know that there's one that's really moved me to say, hey, we need to get this, we need to do this because it's happening. I'll tell you one thing that we've done that's worked real well, and I'll use Rampoldi, which is our French Italian concept, and our flagship. So if you went on to book, let's say you're living in New York, you got a couple friends from California visiting who love wine. When you log on to our site to book a reservation, there's going to be different prompts to say, hey, you can add on a wine tasting experience in our cellar ahead or after your dinner, right? So I have some friends in town. We book, hey, we can do a wine tasting, before we even have dinner. It's going to be fun. We'll be down in the cellar with their sommelier, one-on-one time. We can all laugh and hang out. And then by the time we get to dinner, maybe we'll even find some bottles of wine we like and bring them up. And then we'll have this nice dinner. We can even do it after dinner. So I know a lot of folks will be like, hey, add-ons are there to really drive dollars and how much can we squeeze out of this experience. But I've always seen it through a different lens. And maybe I'm overly optimistic, but you know, there was early on in my career, I heard data about, someone that buys a bottle of wine, is more likely to visit your restaurant again and again, and this was early on in my career. And I kind of looked at that and studied it in real time with different operations I've been involved in. And, I actually found that to be true. If I go into a restaurant, I have the bottle of wine, the extra appetizer, the special, the this. Sure, the restaurant server is going to get a bigger tip and the restaurant made a little bit more money for me. But my experience with those that I was sharing with it, that was special and it stands out in my mind because I had those extra things. It wasn't a normal just, hey, I had a glass of water and a soup and some bread and maybe a salmon or something and left. I had something that stuck with me, remembered. So when I see add-ons or experience-driven items while the guest is booking or during that time, to me, it's all about helping someone who is making a tough decision on where they're choosing to entertain their friends, family, loved ones. Maybe it's a happy time, sad time, everything in between. If you're helping and assisting them to make those choices, it reinforces why they chose you or clicked on you in the first place. And it actually helps them to look really good as well. Hey, I chose this place, I did this. Look at all these things that they have going on and all these touches, our live music, all these things that we do in that one property. To me, you can't discount or discredit how much actually goes in when a guest is thinking about you to book. And so it's so important your presence online and what it looks like from the outside looking in and what you might be able to do to enhance that for someone that's looking for that. It's extremely important. And we actually do it through 7 rooms. Um, and it's very effective because it allows, again, that connection with the guests before they've even entered our restaurant. They've connected with us or they're excited about something. If I can get someone to be excited about going to our place or just give them a little butterflies for 30, 3 seconds while they're booking a reservation, we're winning. And I feel strongly about that. And that's a huge important piece of where I think our industry is continuing to head towards. It's very important.
Mhm. By the way, you continue to paint these experiences in such an appealing light. It's just making me want to book a flight and go there right away. But yeah, that's excellent, Carlos. Pivoting from that, there's another gap that I've seen between what operators know is happening and what's actually happening in their operations, and it has to do with F&B, particularly things like inventory and ordering management, for example. How do you, from an operational point of view, how do you currently manage that? Is it largely based on a system or on the chef's judgment and historical feel? How organic is it versus how systematized?
Yeah, that's such a great question. This is such an important piece because your chef or your general manager, they technically have more buying power than your owners. They have the access to the systems they're ordering every day. They can order thousands of dollars worth of stuff, and an owner doesn't really maybe have access to even go and do that, right? So it's interesting because they have a lot of power, and so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. For me, I think where the biggest piece that is helpful here is that there's some sort of forecast, right? Most restaurants, it's so surprising. Every time I go to a new property or someone's asking me to step into a leadership position there or to consult or to help out or to just give some insight, most chefs and general managers don't have a forecast of what they're allowed to spend based on what we're thinking we're going to end at the end of a week or a month. It sounds so crazy to think that they don't have that. But I've been in major operations that don't have that piece in place, or it gets sent out for the first few months and then it falls off because there's turnover or leadership changes or someone comes in and changes something. Here's how we're going to do it now. This is something that happens a lot in restaurants. The turnover, particularly in leadership, where all of a sudden you're taking this big boat and trying to shifted in so many different ways and you haven't gone anywhere because you haven't followed any kind of philosophy for any amount of time or been disciplined enough to chase something. So where it gets really interesting is once somebody realizes, oh, I have X amount of dollars to spend because I have my starting and ending inventory and my purchases here. Based on my sales. Now I understand where this is all going. Okay, yeah. I don't need to purchase this right now. I don't need to buy this. Now, there are a couple differences when you're dealing with, let's say, your beverage manager, because ultimately, if I'm buying $100,000 in wine, if I don't sell it, I have that value there, right? As long as there's not theft, all these other things going on that shouldn't be. So there's a few different philosophies between, buying maybe, let's say, wine or liquor because you're trying to get a package deal versus soft shell crabs or lobster, something that may not be used in a certain amount of time, right? But just having your folks know, hey, how am I impacting the cash flow? Oh, I see. I want to get those new menus on my budget this month. If I can save our cash flow and really keep things tight, I'll be able to get what I need, or that new bar cart that I want to buy. I think you got to explain it to folks with, hey, here's our forecast. Here's what you have. Here's how it affects the business. Here's how it shows up on your P&L. And all these things you want to do that may cost money that we want to do for the business, you can contribute to that directly if you're disciplined here. And once you kind of connect the dots, that's where the power is. And I think there are a lot of leaders that maybe don't understand it or maybe have a lack of imagination. I think that's an interesting word to use in here, but a P&L, as much as it is financial, you need imagination and you need to have a little bit of creativity and feel to be able to get all these things done when your restaurant's making X amount of dollars, or that unit, if you're in a multi-unit situation, of what they're making. There's still imagination through these tight budgets, through the, hey, you got to hit this number, you got to do this. You still have to have imagination and you have to be creative to get these things done. So there's an art to running these things. And a P&L isn't, hey, I'm really good with numbers and that's it. Sure, that can get you some of the way, but that could also, being too focused on just numbers, could create a staleness or a lack of creativity within the operation. And so, in my opinion, you need equal parts of, you need to know some numbers, but you also have to have some imagination and be creative, because if you don't, things can get stale in a restaurant very quickly. You can have the best food, the best environment, the place can be empty. There's an X factor, like I think I spoke about, earlier in our conversation. There's like this feeling when you walk into a nice bumpin' restaurant that you can't replicate. You need personalities, you need creativity. Sure, you need discipline, you got to know the numbers, but all of those things together is what makes it. So forecasting they need to know. They need to know. And they need to know the formula of how that's affecting the P&L on a day-to-day basis. And if there needs to be price increases or we need to go to another vendor for an item. There's a lot that I can dig into in that, but they got to have the information of what they're allowed to spend. They got to know how that impacts the cash flow and the bottom line. So if they can get the other things they want done within that operation, and when you connect it that way, I think you get a good result.
There is so much that I'd like to ask you, and that we could dive a little deeper, specifically when we discuss F&B and what goes on the day to day. But aware that we're coming, close to the end of our time, I want to shift to the forward-looking perspective of things now, just for a little bit, and ask you a very candid question here, just because I'm very curious of how you would approach it. But if you could fix one thing, right? And I know there's probably many, but if you could fix one thing about the way that your operation is currently running, something that's being on the back of your mind for a while, that you've pushed because there's been other priorities, but that you really, really would want to get to, what would you say?
Yeah, I think it would be a higher focus on marketing within our community and connecting with our community at a higher level than what we're already doing. I really think the identity, particularly, let's use, for example, the New York market, having a guest or a neighbor really feel connected. It looks like that place belongs there. That's where I go for this to really connect and have a powerful voice within the community. To me, I think that often gets overlooked. And there's plenty of different ways to doing it. It's just not how the restaurant looks. It's not just how you market to someone or a newsletter, email blast. Hey, are we donating to the local school for blah blah blah? Are we part of what makes this community and this zip code that we're operating in great? And I think a higher focus and more engagement there, for me, is what I look at is how can we make sure 5 years from now we're still positioned in this neighborhood to be that spot? How about in 15 years? How about in 20 years, if we get to 20 years of us operating on that street corner, taking care of the couple that got married and then had 3 kids and now off to college and now they come back and bring their friends after college. How do you really dynamically continue to communicate and have a voice within your community to continue to push the brand and being associated with that community forward? If I had more, that would be my wish, to have more time to continue focusing in on that and really pushing and driving that. Because ultimately, no matter what we do with food, beverage, the restaurant, you are who your people are, both your employees and both the folks coming in. And we got great ones, by the way, over at Rampoldi and Atlantic Grill in New York City. So to me, that would be where I'd like to apply more pressure. Focus would be great.
Mhm. Excellent. What about, Carlos, for an independent operator who's thinking about modernizing the way that their operation works? Where would you tell them to start?
Yeah, I would ask the question of why you feel you need to do this, what your goals are, and what you're trying to get out of it. I think I mentioned earlier there sometimes can be pressure, whether you're in multi-unit or it's a single unit, sometimes from maybe ownership or leadership, where if things aren't going quite right in that moment and they want to get some answers or some insight, that sometimes operators can feel a little bit of pressure and they can act out of character. So I think, what are you identifying as your problem or your issue, and why do you need to modernize something? Does it need to be modernized? For example, at Rampoldi, the little toast handhelds that everyone loves. I love those things. I think they speed up service. I think they can make you thousands of more dollars. However, for this particular concept, we don't use those for taking order. We have our service staff memorize orders when they take orders, and they really interact with the guest and they know the menu. Could we modernize it where they're taking the order right then and there instead of having to get the order from the guest and then coming back to the POS and keying it in for the kitchen? Sure, we can modernize that. There's no question, but we feel we would lose some of that interaction of what makes it truly special to go inside of our restaurant and the server's looking right at you. You're looking at the server and you're having dialogue if you need it. If you don't, we can be, less less intense. But could we modernize that? Sure. Should we? In our opinion, we like the way that works without modernizing that, but we've modernized a lot of things around it, right? So when you're looking to modernize something, I think it's important because I do think there's helpful tech out there that can do so much for you and help you to get a great result. My question would be, What is your goal in the short term and the long term? Why do you want to do this? And does it align with your brand and your overall vision of what you're trying to accomplish? And it needs to be a decision that's made by someone that's in it for the long run, that understands where they're heading. There's so many times, so many restaurants that I've either, taken over or helped or assisted with, where there's been so many decisions made in such a short period of time without anyone giving any type of consideration to where you were heading or what that ultimate goal is from either the owner, the investors, or wherever what you're trying to accomplish, right? So let's modernize things, let's do it, but it doesn't have to just be for the sake of modernizing it. Does it work for what you're trying to accomplish? I think that's what I would focus on.
I love that insight, and I think it's very unique. I don't think it's being presented here often in the show. That angle of yes, modernize, but what's the trade-off? What are you
Yeah.
sacrificing in
Yeah.
favor of efficiency? And that is a question that I believe everybody should be asking themselves.
Yes.
So, Carlos, that was incredibly insightful. Before I let you go, let me hit you with a quick lightning round. Just this is the fun, fastest paced part of the show. I'm gonna throw a couple of questions at you. I want you to respond as candidly and quickly as you can. First thing that comes to mind, no overthinking. So let me start with this one. What's the most overrated thing in hospitality technology right now?
The most overrated thing in hospitality technology. I think it's just the saturation of it. There's so many apps copying each other, busting them out. There's just so much out there. I think it's just a saturation issue right now with technology in restaurants.
Okay, but on the flip side, what is the one system that you couldn't operate without?
POS, I think eventually is going to win the war of everything. I think if you can get a POS system that can do payroll really well, having that power, you can build everything around it, I think. And I think ultimately they're going to win because that's kind of the heartbeat of everything that you use is that POS system.
Mhm. This one you already brought up a few things during the show, but in your mind, what do great operators do that the average operators are not doing?
Yeah. It's the signal versus noise again. You have to hone in on what the signal is. And you can't understand that if you're not involved in the business. So if you're not involved in the business and you're still using that philosophy of signal over noise, it ain't going to work. You have to both be a part and active in it. Then you can differentiate what the noise is versus the signal.
Last but not least, Carlos, if you were in hospitality today, what would you be doing?
Like in a like a different role than what I'm in right now.
Yeah, I mean, for a living, let's say.
I love bartending. I think there's something so cool about bartending that is unmistakable. I mean, you get to connect with people, you get to shake and create things. The look of somebody sipping a drink that you created after you've done it. There's something just so fun about that. And the interaction between a guest and a bartender, there's nothing more, I think, satisfying than that within an operation. It's such a fun interaction and it's like alive and there's a lot going on. So I like that piece of it.
That's a great one. So we've come to the end of the show, Carlos. I really loved the conversation. That was extremely insightful. I loved your angles and your unique perspectives on both how things can be modernized, but at the same time, what's authentic about the hospitality experiences that we're trying to deliver and what to actually pay attention to. So thank you so much for that. Carlos, where can our listeners follow what you're building?
Listen, go to mchospitality.com, look up Rampoldi, come and visit us. We'd love to host and really show you a different piece of hospitality that's really focused on you, not on us. And I think some restaurants have maybe failed at doing that recently with all the saturation is, hey, we're focused on delivering something for you and we'll be a part of it, but it's a focus on you. So check out Rampoldi. We'd love to see you there. We'd love to host you.
Great. Awesome. Thank you once again, Carlos. And thanks everybody for listening to Deep Current. If you are a hospitality operator or leader dealing with any of the challenges that Carlos described here today and want to keep that conversation going, find us at oceansco.com. See you next time.